Okay, let's dive into something that feels both vast and incredibly intimate today. We often think insights into these big global topics come from, conference rooms or academic papers, sort of handed down from the top.
Right, the usual suspects.
Exactly. But what if some of the most profound wisdom actually bubbles up from the ground, from the everyday experiences of people just navigating life and work across continents?
That's precisely the journey we're embarking on in this deep dive. We're exploring excerpts from a source called The World Spoke First, Global Leadership Insights.
Okay.
And it's not a traditional report, not really. It's something more like a collection of shared truths, a rich tapestry woven from perspectives gathered from individuals all over the world.
So not focusing on titles or fame.
No, none of that. It's about the raw, unvarnished essence of what they've learned, the real stuff.
Right. And the source itself, it deliberately shifts the focus away from, the author's voice and puts it squarely onto the voices of those who contributed.
Yeah, it emphasizes that.
It emphasizes these aren't rehearsed speeches, but something real, deeply human, shared from a place of experience. It's not about who said it, in terms of their position, but about the truth contained within what they shared.
Absolutely. So our mission today is to unpack these powerful insights together, to really listen to what these diverse voices tell us about effective leadership, about communication, connection.
Especially in a world that feels smaller, maybe physically because of technology,
Right.
but sometimes feels more fractured relationally.
That's a great way to put it. And critically, we want to consider what value these insights hold for you, our listener, as you move through your own world.
Connecting with others, leading,
Yeah.
whether you have a formal title or not, right?
Exactly. Everyone leads in some way.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Starting with some of these foundational insights, the ones that speak to the very heart of bridging divides and communicating across difference.
Sounds good.
The source kicks off with this almost dreamlike image. It recounts someone who, as a child, held on to this powerful vision, dreaming of bridging their country to the world. And the really remarkable thing is they actually saw that dream realized.
Yeah, and the way the source describes their success in becoming a cultural bridge, specifically between East and West, it's incredibly instructive.
How so?
It highlights the method. It wasn't achieved, as the source is really quick to point out, through slogans or, grand pronouncements.
Okay, not the big and flashy stuff.
No, it was something much more organic, built through dedicated, consistent effort, patience, practice, and presence.
Patience, practice, and presence. Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Because that's all about the how, isn't it?
Exactly.
And those words, patience, practice, presence, they sound almost deceptively simple, maybe even a bit soft, yet they feel like the absolute antithesis of the rapid-fire, headline-driven approach we often see when people try to build connections or bridge divides today.
Absolutely. Take patience, first of all. That suggests a fundamental respect for time, for process. It's an acknowledgement that genuine understanding, especially across significant cultural gaps, it just doesn't happen overnight.
You can't rush it.
You really can't.
Yeah.
It requires a willingness to slow down, to sit with uncertainty maybe, to allow relationships and understanding to develop organically. It's about resisting that urge for instant results or quick fixes.
Because forcing connection can often backfire, right?
Totally. It can break it.
And practice.
Yeah.
That really underscores that this isn't just some theoretical concept you grasp once and you're done.
No, it's a skill.
It's a skill. Like playing an instrument or learning a language. It requires continuous application, showing up repeatedly, engaging.
Making mistakes, probably.
Oh, definitely making mistakes, learning from them, and refining your approach through actual lived interaction. It's the ongoing effort, this sort of daily discipline of trying to connect and understand.
Precisely. And presence feels like the anchor for the other two, doesn't it?
How do you mean?
Well, it's not merely about physical proximity. It's about being fully engaged mentally and emotionally in the interaction.
It means actively listening, observing the subtle cues, being truly with the person or people you're connecting with in that moment.
Bringing your whole self sort of open and attentive to the space between you.
Yeah, exactly that. Open and attentive.
Now, contrast that with the slogan approach the source dismisses. Slogans are designed for speed, right? For superficial impact.
Broadcasting.
Broadcasting a simple message widely, they tend to flatten complexity and operate from a top-down perspective. They talk at people.
Yeah, they often simplify complex realities into these catchy phrases that, okay, they might sound good, but they often lack real substance. They prioritize persuasion over genuine understanding.
Right.
Exactly, whereas patience, practice, and presence, these are methods of being and relating. They build understanding from the ground up, person by person, interaction by interaction.
It sounds much more respectful.
It is. It's fundamentally about respect for the other person's reality, their pace, the unique cultural framework they inhabit. These build genuine relationships that can actually withstand misunderstanding.
Whereas slogans, well, they often crumble at the first sign of complexity or a differing perspective. This approach recognizes that bridging isn't about shouting your message louder.
Yeah.
It's about building a sturdy path, brick by patient brick, across that river.
That makes so much sense. And it flows directly into another key insight. The source highlights this vital distinction between leadership and communication.
Yeah.
It presents the idea that leadership and communication, they're not the same thing.
Yes, they draw a very clear line between the two concepts initially, but then they immediately add a crucial caveat, highlighting how interdependent they are.
Which is?
That without clear, honest, inspirational communication, there is no leadership.
That feels like a deliberate paradox almost. Why bother separating them so emphatically only to immediately bind them back together?
Yeah, it seems a bit like splitting hairs, doesn't it?
A little.
Yeah.
What's the value in that initial separation?
Well, I think the value lies in recognizing that leadership encompasses many functions beyond just communication. A leader needs strategic vision, right? The ability to make tough decisions.
Manage resources, set direction.
All of that. Those are distinct acts of leadership. However, the source argues that none of these leadership functions can effectively lead people or teams or organizations towards a shared goal unless they are transmitted and understood through effective communication.
So communication is the essential vehicle.
Exactly, the essential vehicle. You might have the most brilliant strategy in the world, but if you can't communicate it clearly, honestly, and inspirationally,
It just stays an idea.
it stays just an idea. It doesn't mobilize people. It doesn't lead anywhere.
Okay, so it's about acknowledging the broader scope of leadership, but at the same time, stating that communication isn't just one part of it. It's the absolutely necessary condition for leadership to even manifest and have impact.
You got it. Without that vehicle, the leadership itself is effectively stranded. It really underscores communication's foundational role. And the source offers this truly profound redefinition of what effective communication actually means in this global context.
Okay, what's that?
It states it's not about how loudly you speak,
Right.
but how deeply your words can be heard.
How deeply your words can be heard.
And it specifically adds deeply heard across cultures, across hearts.
That shifts the entire focus, doesn't it? It moves the measure of success away from the speaker's action, how loud they are, to the listener's reception, how deeply it lands.
Totally.
And adding across cultures, across hearts, just layers in the challenge and the target.
Absolutely. Loudness is about projection, right? About asserting your own presence. Depth of hearing, though, that's about resonance.
Resonance.
Yeah, resonance, about whether your message penetrates the noise, bypasses superficial interpretation, and connects on a human level, maybe even an emotional level.
So it requires more than just transmitting information.
Much more. It requires creating a space for that information to be received and integrated within the listener's own framework, their own lived experience.
So it's not just the literal meaning of the words, but their emotional weight, their cultural weight, whether they resonate with the listener's values and worldview, especially when that worldview is shaped by a different cultural background.
Exactly. And inspirational communication in this context. It isn't necessarily about big, stirring speeches.
Okay.
It's more about communication that connects with people's deeper motivations, their sense of purpose, maybe their shared aspirations, or their desire to contribute.
Communication that moved them to action?
Yes, but not just because they understand the instruction, but because they connect with the underlying meaning and value. Even when those meanings and values might be expressed or prioritized differently across cultures, it's communication that builds shared meaning, not just shared information.
Building shared meaning. That's powerful. And this deep dive into how meaning is heard, it brings us directly to another crucial insight the source highlights.
Which is?
The absolute necessity of humility when it comes to cultural decoding.
Oh, this is so important.
One powerful voice shared a realization that's surprisingly common, especially maybe for English speakers globally. The pitfall of assuming that just because someone speaks English,
Yeah.
they automatically understand English in the same way you do.
This is such a fundamental truth, and it trips up even experienced global professionals all the time. The source drives home the critical point. Each culture decodes meaning differently.
And they offer that simple, yet really striking example that kind of sticks with you.
The Hanoi-Hamburg one.
Yeah. A sentence that comforts in Hanoi might confuse in Hamburg.
That single sentence just encapsulates so much, doesn't it? It's not about the dictionary definition of the words.
No.
It's about the layers of cultural context, the history, the social norms, the nonverbal cues, the collective experiences, all the stuff that infuses those words with meaning, emotional valence, and practical implication.
Right.
The source states it so clearly, almost poetically. Words are vessels, but meaning is cultural. Context is everything.
Words are vessels. That's a beautiful way to put it. Like, they carry potential, but the cultural landscape of the listener determines how that potential is actually realized, what associations get triggered, what emotional weight they carry.
Precisely. And why is this insight so absolutely crucial for global leaders, for anyone working on diverse teams, or frankly just interacting multiculturally?
Well, because misunderstandings aren't just awkward, right?
They can be profoundly damaging. They can lead to unintentional offense, breakdowns in trust, missed deadlines, failed negotiations.
Or just that deep sense of isolation of being misunderstood.
Exactly. If you miss that a seemingly direct request might be seen as rude in one culture, or that a polite yes might actually mean maybe or even no in another.
You're operating with a totally flawed understanding of reality.
Fundamentally flawed. It's about recognizing that the same phrase can carry vastly different levels of politeness, urgency, commitment, emotional significance, depending on the cultural lens it's heard through.
It's not just language, it's a whole system of meaning-making.
Yes, and context isn't just the immediate situation. It's the historical relationship between the cultures, maybe the social hierarchy, the norms around expressing disagreement.
How feedback is given or received.
Even how silence is interpreted. The practical implication is profound. We need to move beyond just linguistic translation and really strive for cultural understanding.
Which demands humility.
That's the key. The willingness to admit that our own cultural framework is just one way of decoding the world, not the universal standard.
And that we have to be perpetual learners.
Always learning, open to adapting our communication based on who we're speaking with. It requires letting go of that assumption that our way is the right way, you know?
That essential humility feels like the gateway to the more human-centered insights the source explores next. It gets very honest about the challenges, highlighting a feeling many people experience in global settings. The loneliness of being misunderstood in multicultural teams.
It names a very real, often difficult tension inherent in fast-paced global work.
Which is?
There's this relentless demand for speed and efficiency, right? Coming from global headquarters or market pressures.
Yeah, so push you to go faster.
And then there's the slower, more deliberate rhythm that is actually required for building genuine trust and connection across cultures.
It's a classic conflict, isn't it? The pressure to move fast, iterate quickly, show results.
Right.
Constantly running up against the need to build rapport, understand complex cultural nuances, make sure everyone feels truly heard, which just takes time.
It does. And the source offers a very blunt yet insightful explanation for why communication often fails in this precise environment. They cite one global voice. Oni, in the words of one global voice, it fails when it's driven by ego, not empathy, when we perform instead of connect.
Oof. When we perform instead of connect. That phrase really cuts through, doesn't it?
It does.
It resonates because, well, if we're honest, we've probably all been guilty of it at some point.
Oh, absolutely.
Putting on a front, maybe using corporate jargon, focusing on sounding knowledgeable or in control, ensuring we look good.
Basically performing.
Yeah, performing rather than genuinely trying to understand the person across from us or making sure they understand us.
Absolutely. Ego pushes us to prioritize our own perspective, our need to be right, to appear competent or dominant. Empathy, though, pulls us towards understanding the other person's reality.
Their feelings, their perspective.
Right. Performance is about presenting this curated version of yourself or your message. Connection is about authentic, reciprocal engagement between people.
And in multicultural teams, where you already have these inherent differences in communication styles and norms.
Gut communication driven by ego and performance is almost guaranteed to fail. It just creates distance, fosters distrust, and prevents the genuine vulnerability and openness you need to bridge those divides.
It's broadcasting rather than bonding.
Exactly. It creates a wall instead of a bridge.
So how can organizations and leaders navigate this? How do you honor that need for speed while still allowing for the slow, patient work of trust building?
It requires a conscious, intentional shift. In priorities and design, maybe. Meaning acknowledging that just pursuing speed in the short term might come at the cost of deeper understanding, trust, and long-term effectiveness.
So you have to deliberately make space for it.
You do. It means allocating dedicated time and resources, not just for task completion, but for relationship building.
Yeah.
Informal check-ins, cultural exchange sessions, creating safe spaces for asking those naive questions.
Right.
It's about deliberately building processes that encourage deep listening and thoughtful inquiry over just rapid-fire directives. It means valuing the relational infrastructure just as much as the technical or strategic stuff.
Building that relational infrastructure, that sounds key. And speaking of relationships and dynamic interaction, the source uses this beautiful analogy for leadership that moves away from rigid structure.
Ah, the jazz ensemble.
Yes. Real leadership, they suggest, is like a jazz ensemble.
This analogy is incredibly rich because it fundamentally challenges those traditional hierarchical models, doesn't it?
How so?
Well, a jazz ensemble isn't about one person dictating every single note to compliant musicians.
Right.
It's about individual voices, distinct instruments moving in relation to each other, listening, responding, improvising, finding harmony together.
It's not about enforced uniformity.
Not at all. It's about achieving resonance.
Resonance. There's that word again, like words needing to be heard deeply. Here, it's the leader and the team finding a way to resonate together.
Yes.
To create music out of individual contributions.
Yes, exactly. And the source defines harmony within this jazz context, not as the absence of difference or contrast.
Okay.
But as the dance of contrast made meaningful by intention.
The dance of contrast. I like that.
Think of jazz, you have different rhythms, different melodic lines, sometimes dissonance, sometimes consonance. But it all comes together.
Why?
Because the musicians are listening deeply to each other, and they're guided by a shared intention, a shared feel for the piece.
So how does this challenge traditional hierarchical views? Those models often picture the leader as, like, the conductor with a baton.
Right, controlling everything.
Or maybe the virtuoso soloist, the undeniable star.
The jazz analogy suggests leadership is far more fluid, more collaborative. The leader might set the initial theme, maybe establish the core rhythm.
Okay.
But then their role is to listen acutely, to create space for others to improvise and contribute their unique voice.
And guide the flow.
Subtly guide the overall flow through interaction and responsiveness, not rigid control. Resonance here means the leader's actions and communication don't just issue commands.
Right.
They create an environment where individual contributions are not only allowed but encouraged, where differences are seen as potential sources of richness, and where everyone feels connected to the overall purpose, allowing their individual notes to contribute to the collective music.
Okay, but encouraging that dance of contrast sounds challenging. How does a leader foster that without it just descending into chaos?
That's a fair question. It requires a very high level of psychological safety within the team.
Meaning people feel safe to speak up.
Safe to bring their full, sometimes contrasting perspectives, their different cultural approaches, even their disagreements, without fear of judgment or retribution.
So the leader has to cultivate that environment.
Actively. By soliciting diverse viewpoints, facilitating dialogue where differences can be explored and understood constructively.
And making sure everyone's clear on the shared goal.
Exactly. Ensuring that the shared intention, the purpose of the music they are creating together is crystal clear. The leader's role is to hold the space for that dance, to ensure it remains meaningful, rather than trying to suppress the different movements in favor of a single monotonous step.
Leading by enabling and integrating, not dictating.
You got it.
That courage to embrace contrast and difference seems deeply connected to another insight the source highlights. The courage it takes to build trust culturally.
Yes.
They speak about observing what happens when global strategies or messages ignore local nuance.
And the result.
The messaging might be perfectly crafted in a global sense, maybe technically correct, but the hearts of the people receiving it remain untouched.
This is such a powerful truth, and it comes straight from direct experience. You can tell. You can have a brilliant marketing campaign designed for global consistency or a standardized HR policy rolled out worldwide.
Right. Happens all the time.
But if it doesn't land correctly, if it conflicts with deep-seated cultural values or communication norms or historical context in a specific place, it just won't connect on a human level.
People might comply superficially.
They might, but you won't earn their genuine engagement, their loyalty, their trust. It bypasses the heart.
And the source specifies the absolutely crucial components for building trust effectively in these diverse settings.
What are they?
Trust is built in tone, timing, and cultural attention.
Okay, those are actionable elements, things leaders and team members can actually work on.
Let's break them down. Tone.
Tone is not just the words you use, right? It's the attitude, the respect or lack thereof conveyed, the level of formality or informality that's appropriate, the emotional coloring.
And timing. That seems critical.
Oh, absolutely. Knowing when it's appropriate to push for a decision, maybe when to hold back, when to introduce a sensitive topic, when to allow space for reflection, a perfectly good message delivered at the wrong time.
Or with the wrong tone.
Can completely miss its mark or even damage relationships. Big time.
And then cultural attention. That sounds like the ongoing proactive work, doesn't it?
It really is. It's the commitment to observing, learning, and adapting to the specific norms, values, communication styles of the people you're interacting with. It's the absolute opposite of a one-size-fits-all approach.
It requires curiosity and diligence.
It does. And then the source delivers that incredibly powerful statement. You cannot manage a team into trust.
Ooh.
You must earn it.
You must earn it. That's such a fundamental human truth, isn't it? Often forgotten in transactional or hierarchical environments.
Totally. Trust isn't something you can just mandate or install like software.
It's not a checklist item.
No, it's not a process you force on people. It's a state of being between people, built through consistent, authentic interaction over time.
How's it earned then?
Through demonstrating reliability, integrity, competence, and crucially, a genuine care for the well-being and dignity of others. It's fragile, too, easily broken.
And the source brings it right down to the granular level, specifying how this trust is earned, not just with grand gestures.
No, but in the small daily interactions.
Like,
in every choice of word, every pause to listen.
that detail is profound. It tells us trust isn't built just in the big moments.
No, it's in the accumulation of countless small ones. Choosing your words carefully, understanding their potential impact across cultures, demonstrating respect through your language, these build trust.
And crucially, that act of pausing to listen. Why is that so significant?
Because it signals respect, doesn't it? Respect for the other person's voice, their perspective, their time. It shows you're willing to create space to actually receive what they have to offer.
Rather than just waiting for your turn to speak or pushing your own agenda.
Exactly. It validates their presence and their contribution. And that is absolutely foundational to earning trust, especially across cultural divides where people might feel unheard or marginalized or misunderstood.
That commitment to listening and truly valuing every voice feels like another core theme emerging from these global insights.
It really is. The source speaks in a deep devotion to serve across borders, to respect every voice in the room.
And they make a very specific point, focusing particular attention on even those that stay quiet.
Emphasizing especially those voices.
Why is giving particular attention to the quiet voices so important? Because in many professional settings, the focus naturally goes to the most assertive,
Right.
the most verbal people.
Exactly. Because quietness is one of the most easily misinterpreted communication styles, particularly across cultures.
How so?
Well, in some cultures, speaking up quickly or assertively might be valued, seen as a sign of confidence or engagement.
Sure.
But in others, silence might indicate thoughtful consideration before speaking, or deference to hierarchy, maybe discomfort with the language or the setting.
Or just a cultural norm that values listening over speaking.
Right. So if leaders or team members only listen to the loudest voices, they miss potentially invaluable insights, concerns, perspectives held by those who communicate differently.
And they risk making decisions based on incomplete information.
And alienating those who don't fit the dominant mold.
So it's about creating an inclusive environment where contributing doesn't require changing your fundamental communication style.
Exactly. And the source offers this incredibly insightful reframe, citing another global voice.
Let's hear it.
In the words of one global voice, you don't need to be louder, you need to be truer.
You don't need to be louder, you need to be truer. Wow. That quote cuts right to the core, doesn't it?
It really does. It directly challenges that common assumption that impact or influence is directly correlated with volume or assertiveness.
It suggests real power, real connection comes from authenticity, integrity.
Yes, from speaking from a place of truth aligned with your genuine beliefs and intentions, rather than trying to project a certain image or overwhelm others with sound.
So what does it mean to be truer rather than louder in practice? How does that look?
Well, I think it means focusing on the substance and sincerity of your message, connecting with your core values, and expressing them with conviction. Maybe even vulnerability.
Instead of relying on performative bluster.
Exactly. Or forcefulness. In a team or leadership context, it's about creating a space where people feel safe, bringing their authentic selves, their honest perspectives, their uncertainties, their genuine insights.
Where impact comes from the validity and sincerity of what's shared, not just how forcefully it's delivered.
Precisely. And that fosters that sense of psychological safety and belonging, where diverse contributions are genuinely valued, regardless of the volume.
That idea of authenticity and connecting with core values feels linked to the source's exploration of weaving together the past and the future.
Ah, yes.
They touch on this dynamic idea of connecting ancestral values with the rapid pace of the digital world.
This section speaks to the sort of timelessness of certain human principles, doesn't it? And the need to find ways for them to remain relevant, even flourish, in our incredibly fast-changing, tech-driven environment.
And they offer compelling examples like reimagining servant leadership for meetings held in the metaverse.
That's a fascinating contrast, isn't it? How do you take an ancient concept like servant leadership, which often involves physical presence, empathy, focusing on the well-being and growth of others, and apply it effectively in a completely virtual environment, a digital world?
How do you?
It requires translating the core principles into digital actions and intentions. It means ensuring equitable digital access and participation for everyone on the team, regardless of location or tech savviness.
Okay.
It involves deliberately designing virtual interactions to be inclusive and engaging. It means prioritizing digital well-being, being mindful of screen fatigue, time zone differences, the blurring lines between work and life.
All that stuff.
All that stuff amplified by tech. And it's about using digital tools intentionally to amplify quieter voices, maybe create asynchronous ways for people to contribute if speaking up in real time is challenging for them.
So basically applying the core principle, putting the team's needs and growth first, but within the digital realm. They also mention storytelling as strategy, which makes intuitive sense, given how humans are wired for narrative, but also, perhaps surprisingly, again, silence is strategy.
Storytelling as strategy, yeah, that acknowledges the profound power of narrative to transcend data points and connect with people on a deeper, more emotional, more memorable level.
It's how cultures transmit wisdom, values, history.
Absolutely. So using storytelling strategically in modern leadership or communication to articulate vision, build culture, explain complex change, bridge cultural gaps, that taps into this fundamental human need for narrative. A compelling story can land more deeply and resonate more widely than 100 bullet points.
Definitely. Okay, but silence is strategy. That still feels counterintuitive in a world that equates value with constant activity and noise.
It does, but silence can be an incredibly powerful and strategic tool when used intentionally. We already talked about pausing to listen.
Right. That's a key form of strategic silence.
It creates space for others, shows respect, enables deeper understanding. But silence can also be used strategically in, say, negotiations.
Yeah.
Creating a pause after making a point to let it land, or maybe to encourage the other party to speak further to fill the space.
Ah, okay.
It can be used in communication to create emphasis, allowing a crucial statement to resonate without immediately jumping to the next thing. And culturally, understanding the strategic use of silence is vital.
Because it means different things in different places.
Exactly. In some contexts, silence after a question indicates deep thought. In others, it might signal disagreement or discomfort. Recognizing the power and potential meaning of intentional quiet is a sophisticated communication skill.
And one that allows space for reflection and deeper processing in a noisy world.
Precisely.
This beautifully loops back to that overarching theme the source reinforces. Cultural nuance isn't a barrier to connection.
No.
It is, in fact, a bridge.
And they offer a beautiful and compelling reason why, citing another global voice. Oh, in the words of one global voice, the more we notice nuance, the more we belong to one another.
The more we notice nuance, the more we belong to one another. That is such a powerful reframe.
Isn't it?
It takes cultural differences, which can often feel like obstacles or points of friction, and positions them as pathways to deeper human connection and belonging.
Exactly. When we approach cultural differences, not with apprehension or a desire to smooth them away, but with genuine curiosity.
A willingness to observe.
Yeah, to notice the subtle variations in communication style, the different ways respect is shown, the varied values that shape behavior, the unspoken assumptions, that very act of noticing becomes the bridge.
Because it demonstrates care, effort, respect.
All of the above. It moves us beyond simply tolerating difference to actively appreciating the richness it brings. By seeking to understand the specific cultural landscape someone inhabits, we see them more fully as an individual shaped by a unique context.
Not just a representative of some broad category.
Exactly. And in that deeper seeing and understanding, a sense of shared humanity and belonging can truly flourish. We belong to each other more fully when we see and honor the unique ways we each make meaning in the world.
So, pulling all these threads together then, what does this collection of global voices ultimately tell us about what real leadership is, and perhaps just as importantly, what it definitely is not?
Well, the source reflects on what was most impactful and moving during the process of gathering these insights. And it wasn't the polished, prepared answers or the impressive titles.
No, what was it?
It was the vulnerability people showed, the feeling behind their words, the pauses that spoke volumes, and the profound trust it required for them to share something truly authentic and unrehearsed.
And based on these deeply human observations, the source offers a definition of real leadership that feels, I don't know, refreshingly grounded and true.
Yeah.
Cutting through those conventional ideas centered on power or position. Real leadership, they conclude, is not a title on a business card.
Definitely not.
It is not a perfectly delivered TED Talk.
Yeah. No, it is a willingness to be changed by the encounter.
A willingness to be changed by the encounter. That strikes me as incredibly profound.
Me too.
It means leadership isn't about arriving with all the answers, projecting an image of unshakable certainty, or holding rigidly to a preconceived plan.
No, it's about remaining open, humble, receptive enough to allow the experiences and perspectives of others, especially those different from your own, to genuinely impact and transform you.
It completely inverts the traditional power dynamic, doesn't it?
How so?
Well, conventional leadership often emphasizes influence flowing from the leader to the followers changing them.
Right.
This definition highlights the leader's own susceptibility to change. True strength is presented not as rigidity, but as adaptability. The humility to learn and grow through interaction.
So it really differs from conventional ideas of leadership as just authority or expertise. It places the emphasis squarely on the leader's posture of receptivity, their capacity for learning and transformation, rather than just their knowledge or position.
It's a leadership that evolves with the people and the context.
Beautifully put.
And this posture of receptivity is captured in that leadership philosophy mentioned towards the end. Leading by listening, not pushing.
Yes, and this isn't framed as just a mere technique, is it? It's presented as a fundamental way of navigating the world.
Leading by listening, not pushing.
Across cultures, across seasons, across contradiction.
Leading by listening across contradiction. Okay, that sounds particularly challenging. How do you listen effectively, truly receive information when you're faced with viewpoints or realities that seem fundamentally opposed to your own? Or even opposed to each other?
That's a great point. It doesn't imply agreement with the contradiction or even that you can resolve it in the moment.
Okay.
It means cultivating the capacity and the space to understand it. It requires intellectual humility to consider that your own understanding might be incomplete.
And emotional intelligence.
Yes, emotional intelligence to recognize the underlying needs, values, fears, or experiences that give rise to that contradictory perspective. Listening across contradiction means being willing to sit with discomfort, to seek first to understand why that contradiction exists, what truth it holds for the person expressing it, before you jump to evaluating, judging, or imposing a solution.
It's about understanding the source code of the disagreement, maybe.
That's a good way to think about it, yeah.
And why does this approach, leading by listening, ultimately empower others and lead to better outcomes than simply pushing?
Well, pushing is about asserting your own will, isn't it? Your idea, your power. It often disempowers others by reducing their role to either complying or resisting.
Right.
Listening, on the other hand, fundamentally acknowledges the other person's agency, their perspective, their value. It makes them feel seen, heard, respected, which is inherently empowering.
And pragmatically.
Pragmatically, listening to diverse viewpoints, even contradictory ones, provides a far richer, more complete picture of reality. It uncovers potential problems, reveals hidden opportunities, sparks innovative solutions.
Things a leader just pushing their own agenda might never see.
Exactly. Better, more sustainable, more inclusive outcomes almost always arise from decisions informed by this deeper, more nuanced understanding that only genuine listening can provide.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what powerful reminders have these voices from around the world offered us through this source?
They reminded us that empathy, it's not a secondary consideration, a nice-to-have soft skill.
No.
It is infrastructure, the foundational necessity upon which connection, understanding, and effective collaboration across difference are built.
Okay. What else?
They showed us that silence is not merely an absence of sound or activity.
It can be.
An invitation, a deliberate space created for listening, for reflection, for others to step into and share their thoughts.
And perhaps most profoundly,
they echoed the truth that the most impactful leaders are not those who just amplify their own voice, but those whose leadership resonates because it echoes the essential truths of the people they serve.
it's a truly moving and insightful collection, isn't it? Gathered not from the usual suspects at the pinnacles of power,
No.
but from people navigating the complexities of the world on the ground, offering wisdom born of lived experience.
Really powerful stuff.
And now, as the source itself suggests, having journeyed through these insights with us, the focus shifts back to you, the learner.
Yeah, the source leaves us with these powerful, evocative questions.
Yeah.
They're designed to land deeply and provoke reflection, inviting you to consider how you will carry these insights forward.
What will your voice carry into the next border you cross?
Into the next conversation.
Into the next quiet room where someone waits to feel understood?
Will it carry curiosity?
Humility?
The courage to unlearn?
The softness to stay?
Because the world spoke first, sharing its wisdom. And now, the invitation is for you to consider, what will you do with that wisdom as you step forward?